Faithful love flowing down from the thorn-covered crown makes me whole, saves my soul, washes whiter than snow. Faithful love calms each fear, reaches down, dries each tear, holds my hand when I can't stand on my own. Faithful love, from above, came to earth to show the Father's love, and I'll never be the same, for I've seen faithful love face to face, and Jesus is his name. Faithful love is a friend just when hope seems to end. Welcome face, sweet embrace, tender touch filled with grace. Faithful love, endless power, living flame, Spirit's fire, burning bright in the night, guiding my way. Faithful love, from above, came to earth to show the Father's love, and I'll never be the same, for I've seen faithful love face to face, and Jesus is his name. Wonderful, so wonderful is your unfailing love. Your cross has spoken mercy over me, over me. No eye has seen, no ear has heard, no heart could fully know how glorious, how beautiful you are. Beautiful one I love, beautiful one I adore, beautiful one my soul must sing. Powerful, so powerful, your glory fills the skies, your mighty works displayed for all to see, all to see. The beauty of your majesty awakes my heart to sing. How marvelous, how wonderful you are. Beautiful one I love, beautiful one I adore, beautiful one my soul must sing. Beautiful one I love, beautiful one I adore, beautiful one my soul must sing. You opened my eyes to your wonders anew. You captured my heart with this love, 'cause nothing on earth is as beautiful as you. You opened my eyes to your wonders anew. You captured my heart with this love, 'cause nothing on earth is as beautiful as you. Beautiful one I love, beautiful one I adore, beautiful one my soul must sing. Beautiful one I love, beautiful one I adore,
Good morning, ladies, and welcome to our ladies class. We have not met for the last few weeks. We were having our Christmas break and just a little bit of a winter break, but now we are finally ready to resume our ladies class. So for those of you who might be joining us online for the first time, we have been working through the book Bind Us Together by Dorita McDaniel. And we are talking about relationships. We are spending a lot of time, most specifically, we're talking about the relationships that Christian sisters have with one another, but we are discussing just relationships in general with our family, with people that we encounter out in the world as we go about our daily lives. And the chapter today is for every relationship that we possibly could have, because this chapter that we're starting today, chapter 8, is Share Kind Deeds. Before we get started in the chapter, there is a group that I'm a part of in Facebook, and it's called Some Good News, because there is an awful lot of bad news in the world sometimes. And one of my friends told me about this group, and I love it because it compiles news stories with good things happening in the world, people helping one another and people doing things for each other. So they're from all over the United States, sometimes even all over the world, because sometimes they'll pick up a story in Europe or Asia or somewhere. But most of them are the United States, and the things that come across this board are just really encouraging. And it's just a little Facebook group that I'm a part of, and it can get so discouraging. We can get to feeling like, I just don't see that much kindness around, but it's still happening. We can still be it. In this chapter, it's going to talk about how we let our light shine and we be the light. And if we're doing that, then there is still kindness in the world. But we can just remember, because it will help your optimism and your encouragement so much if you just remember that it's happening and look for it. So we have to do that. And I just really do like that group. It will have all kinds of little things that it does that it will talk about, like encouraging quotes from authors and things too. So usually whoever keeps up with that board usually has at least 4 or 5 posts a day. And it's just one of those little things I've done for myself that has made me feel a lot better. And I thought I would throw that plug out there, not so that people could necessarily do that, but so that you look for something of your own like that to do. Because to me, I am encouraged when I see church family and friends doing kindness, but it's like extra encouraging to remember that there are still strangers in the world doing things that are kind too. So I was reading, I don't know if y'all saw in the news, but the medevac helicopter that crashed that was transporting that infant little girl, well, the local paper and news station there where it happened published a whole thing about it. That pilot was such a hero. Everything he did kept other people from getting hurt because he knew that he was going down. He had to avoid schools and malls and workplaces and managed to crash in such a way that only impacted the helicopter itself, got everybody inside out, and then, even though he was injured some, did everything that needed to be done to stop more fuel from leaking and things, like went around the whole helicopter securing it until the EMTs got there to check them all out. So he saved so many lives that day. And he did it just as a matter of happenstance. It's what he needed to do, so he did it. And when I was reading that, because the rest of the news media just kind of was like a blip of this thing happened, but when I got to see the local stories coming down, it was just so amazing, and I thought that pilot is a hero. So anyway, just keep it in mind when you see things like that. Kindness is still everywhere. It's not every single place, but it's there. We can find it. So this chapter is called Share Kind Deeds. We are starting on page 107, and we're going to read every one of these chapters. She's got some kind of little introduction with some people where she has the thing. Oh, yes. Somebody just has reminded me we've got to start our class with prayer. So, Father God, we come before you this morning, and we are so thankful for this day. We are thankful for the winter time. We are thankful for the time that the trees and the plants have to rest. We're thankful for the cold outside, and we're thankful for all of the things that seasons mean, where we can see God, just you, in all of the things. We are thankful for this congregation that meets here at Collinsville, thankful for our elders here that are overseeing the flock here. We are thankful for our Christian sisters that we are talking about, and for our church family, that no matter who we are, no matter what our families are like with our biological families, that we always have a family in God's family if we are added to the Lord's church. So we are thankful for that. We're thankful that our family stretches far and wide across the entire world, and that every Christian is our brother or our sister. We are thankful for this book and for the writer who wrote it, and we are thankful for this time to study it. In Jesus' name, amen. So at the very beginning on page 107, it says, Elise snapped the clip on her bracelet and gave a final pat to her hair. There, all set to go. Lucy, ready? Almost, shouted her daughter. Unsurprised, Elise sat down on the sofa with her husband, who was patiently waiting while reading his newspaper. Elise smiled as she thought about the festivities to come, a teacher appreciation dinner at the church building. This would be the fourth one for her. She'd been teaching for 17 years, and the dinner was held every 5 years. She always enjoyed them, but she didn't need to be thanked because she enjoyed teaching the 4-year-olds. They soaked up Bible stories the way a dry sponge soaks up water. Teaching them was a talent God had given her, so every year she attended the teacher training workshops to improve her skills, get new ideas, and get inspired. 17 years in, and she still loved it. Still, it was nice of the congregation to recognize the teacher's efforts. Elise's thoughts wandered to her classroom, an inviting, cheerful place. Parents told her that their children were eager for Bible class on Sunday morning. This quarter, Anna, her co-teacher, had decorated one bulletin board with the children's favorite character, Little Bear, and another bulletin board with mother duck, baby ducklings, butterflies, and a pond with a frog on a lily pad. That Anna. Every quarter, new bulletin boards that coordinated with the curriculum appeared like magic. Elise knew that as a wife and mother who also worked outside the home, she just didn't have the time to prepare the lessons and create the bulletin boards. Thank you, God, for Anna. So she recognizes this thing that's been done, and she's thankful for it. And I hope it doesn't say in this chapter, but I sure do hope that she remembered to tell Anna thank you too. So we know that we've been talking about communication. It is verbal and nonverbal. We've said that many times throughout this book. So the words we say matter, but everything else about us matters too. Our eye contact and our gestures, our facial expressions. Is it possible for somebody to listen in a completely disrespectful way? Right? They don't even have to say anything. But can we have the eye rolling and these kinds of things? What about the slamming of things? I mean, it is possible to listen and not say anything wrong and still project to the other person that we are not listening, or at least that we are not listening well. And a lot of times when we think of that, we think of, teenagers maybe sometimes struggling with those nonverbal gestures, but can adults do it too? Have any of us ever worked in a workplace where we can see somebody slamming a drawer or rolling their eyes at a meeting, these kinds of things? So we have to be careful as Christians what sorts of things that we are implying with our nonverbal language, right? If a wife is talking to her husband and is constantly looking exasperated and sighing with him, he's probably not feeling very encouraged right then, right? So we have to be careful with that nonverbal speech, and we have to be careful with our words. But a lot of people are reasonably careful with being good with their words, right? Most people aren't going to go in mouthing off to their bosses, but they might not be being careful with those other things. And it's noticeable. We can see when other people are doing those things. So I think because it talks here about our oral communication, we use that to initiate conversation. We use it to deepen conversation, right? We can't get to know people if we're not ever speaking with them, because we won't hear what they in turn have to say to us, and we won't possibly forge connections that way. So in 1 John 3:18, John tells us to love each other in deeds, in actions, and in truth, right? We have to have action. I have a sign hanging in, or not hanging, but sitting on a shelf in our living room, and it says, "Love is not what you say, love is what you do." And I remind my kids of that sign a lot, because I want them to remember that I can say I love you all day long, but if I'm not showing I love you, then I'm not really loving, not in the way that I need to be. So we have to think about our actual actions. Kind deeds are part of the foundation to our bonding. We don't form bonds with people if we're not kind with them. Not good bonds anyway. So how can kind deeds contribute to a solid relationship experience? If someone is never kind and is always unkind to others, do they have a lot of relationships to boast of? Probably not. They may have interactions with people, right? They may have employer-employee interactions or co-worker interactions, doctor-patient interactions, customer and support interactions, but they are not going to have a lot of friends. They're not going to have family that they're close to, because you can't mistreat people, which is really what we're doing if we're not being kind. We can't have that sort of behavior and form close, good relationships with other people. We just can't do it. So we have to think about what our deeds do. And when I think about our example in the Bible of Christ, I can see a lot of kindness in what he does. The way that he interacts with people, the way that he engages with people and talks to them, the things that he says are kind. And it doesn't mean that he didn't ever have things to say, right? He admonished people, he rebuked people, but I think that he always does it in a way that is worth imitating. And that's not what we can say necessarily about every person that we meet. So there is a book called The 5 Love Languages. Has anybody actually read that book here? No. I have read it. It was written by Gary Chapman. He says there are 5 love languages. This book has been written quite some time ago, and it has been applied all over the place. Sometimes even teachers use it in the classrooms. There are different books that people have written based off of his book. I'm not sure how they obtained the copyright permission to reference his ideas, but his ideas get referenced all over the place. So he says there are 5 love languages that people use to express love, but they're also the languages that they feel love in. So if you are a person, chances are that one of these 5 is your highest one. It doesn't mean that all of the 5 wouldn't be good. You could appreciate any one of these 5, but there is one of these that is probably going to speak to you more than others. And in his actual book, he actually has a many page-long survey where you go through and you answer all these questions with an A, B, C, D, or E. And then whatever one you have the most of, it's like all the A's are the first one. And so that it tells you this is your love language based on the answers you gave to these questions. So the love languages are, number 1, words of affirmation. Number 2, quality time. Number 3, giving and receiving gifts. Number 4, acts of service. And number 5, physical touch. And we're actually going to go through and break down every single one of those 5. So it is a good book. If no one in here has read it, it is a really good book. Probably the library has it. I'm not sure about around here. As you seek to make connections, spend time watching people. Observe their behavior and try to determine how it is that they express love. because those expressions are often an indication of the behavior that's going to make them feel loved. If somebody uses words of affirmation all the time with others, then chances are good that words of affirmation are going to make them feel really good when they hear them. So what are we doing when we affirm somebody? We're lifting them up, right? We are telling them that they're valuable to us. We are telling them how much they mean to us. People who send cards, thank you cards, get well cards, birthday cards, they are trying to connect with words, right? And we live in a world that ever increasingly doesn't send cards. People might give them to their most very special people, but it's not a world that really does that anymore. And it has previously been, right? There was a time when everybody would have written notes and letters and cards and things to each other. And that's just not the kind of world that we live in now. And so when you get a card today, I mean, it should just be priceless to you because it is something valuable. Somebody took their time, they chose the card, they sat down, and even if it's a Christmas card and all they did was sign their name at the bottom of it, they still had to turn over the envelope and write your name on it. You know what I mean? It was time. They thought of you, and they specifically set aside time to do that thing. So whenever I get a card, it is very valuable to me. I keep all the cards that we get in a little plastic storage tote. And sometimes if you're having a really bad day and you go back through and you say, what were people saying to me? Somebody gave me a card for doing this, and it makes you feel good because you remember. Like even if you're feeling lonely or down or discouraged at that day, you can remember, okay, on this day, this person said this. So it is important. That is a way to tell other people that you love them. People who use words of affirmation will pat you on the back. They are the ones that are going to tell you, good job. You did so well on that project, or you did so great when you spoke that day. In general conversation, they're the ones that are going to tell you, I love your dress. Your hair is beautiful. I think that tie is nice. They're the ones that are going to thank the teacher for the time and the preparation for doing the class. They're the ones that are going to thank the manager for the time that they spent organizing the project that they're doing. So chances are that if a person is that person that gives affirmation, everybody knows it. If I go back and I think to other workplaces that I've had, I can instantly think of who the people are that do words of affirmation, because they are the ones that over and over with their words verbally expressed all these things about how nice you look, about how good of a job you did. And I'm sure you can do the same. If you're thinking amongst your family, who are the ones that do the words? I'm sure that these people come to your mind right away. Don't we all at least need occasional good words from others? Really, doesn't everybody need to hear that good word from other people? Words of commendation are encouraging, and they fit the description for kind deeds. So the Bible has a lot to say about our words, right? When we talk about what the Bible speaks on, words are constantly spoken on in the Old Testament and the New Testament. So she has just a few verses here. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. Colossians 4:6. I have this verse hanging in our living room with a picture of a little salt shaker with the salt spilling out. And I love that picture. There's a lady that creates digital art. So she creates the art, but then she makes it into like a glossy digital print. And I have several of her prints because they're inexpensive and I can frame them and they just look nice. But she does a lot of scripture and a lot of song lyrics from hymns. And so anyway, I love the reminder right on our wall to make sure we're watching our words. The tongue of the righteous is choice silver. The heart of the wicked is of little worth. The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for lack of sense. Proverbs 10:20 and 21. Anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down, but a good word makes him glad. Proverbs 12:25. Do we ever have a time where you're feeling so anxious about something, and then a good word that someone says to encourage you instantly makes that alleviated a little bit? Makes you feel a little bit more encouraged than you were. So our words are important. When we have words of affirmation, we need to remember that it's not just our words to others, our words to ourselves matter too. She says, here's an example, instead of saying, I am so stupid, perhaps you could say, well, that was not the smartest thing I've ever done. Next time I will. Da 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 da. Every cell in your body hears the words you speak to yourself. And you have to nourish yourself too. And I really like that she said that, because I think sometimes we live in a world that makes it very easy to beat yourself down and to feel critical of yourself and to feel like you're not measuring up and to feel like you just didn't do a good enough job. A lot of people are walking around feeling like failures a lot of the time about a lot of different things. And I think that probably everybody feels that somewhere about some decision that they make, about some choice that they did. And so we can't do that. That's not what this says. I mean, my Bible doesn't tell me to sit around and say things like that to myself. It doesn't mean that you're condoning sin in yourself, right? That's not what this is saying at all. But that we are more gentle with ourselves about things, especially things that aren't, because no one is going to be perfect. So if you are beating yourself up because you're not a perfect mom, I mean, you're not going to be a perfect mom, so you can't hold that as your standard. You can just try to be a good one and try to do the very best you can do. So words of affirmation matter, and they matter to everybody, but to some people, they matter the most. And every marriage book I have ever read has suggested that our husbands have a very real need for our words to be uplifting and encouraging. Husbands have a very big job, right? If they're supposed to be the head of the home, they're supposed to lead in their families. People who are leading need encouragement from other people. We can read about Moses when he was tired and couldn't hold his hands up anymore. What did they do? They held his hands up for him, with him. And he got those words of encouragement. Not always, but at least in that instance he did. And did it make it easier for him to lead when he had those words than when he felt like he was all alone and having to do it with all the Israelites against him? It did. So words of affirmation are important, and our husbands rely on us, if we have them, to give words of affirmation, to give encouragement, to say thank you for what we see being done. Our children need words of affirmation if we have them. We have to affirm what they're doing, and we have to affirm that they're good people. There's a quote, and I can't remember the exact quote to phrase it just right, but it goes to the effect of, if we talk to our kids like they are the kindest and smartest and most interesting people we know, then they will be those people, because those words matter to them, and they will be able to see where they're kind. If you have a child that struggles, both of our boys being on the autism spectrum struggle with impulse control sometimes, and they struggle with sometimes feeling aggressive and things. But when I can point out to them, that was so nice what you just did for your little brother. That was so nice when you helped me clean up the kitchen just now. Instead of always pointing out the areas where they're struggling, which one is going to help them be able to choose the less impulsive act more frequently? The words of affirmation, right? Because being critical of where they're struggling, and it doesn't mean I don't point out struggles. Again, it's not about just not being honest. It's not about ignoring the truth. But if I can point out those good things, then it makes it, when I need to point out a correction, easier to hear, because they realize that's not all I think of them. That I don't just think that they have areas that they're struggling in, that I see all these things that they're doing right too. And that's how any person works. Everybody needs those words of affirmation. Quality time is the second one that Gary Chapman talked about. Do you see people expressing love by visiting the sick and the shut-ins in the homes or nursing homes? They are giving their precious time. Time is valuable, and we all have a very limited supply of it. And the more demands we have on our time, the more limited our time is. Because when you start throwing out work demands and children demands, and then maybe demands from other things in the community and demands from other family members, all of a sudden we have less and less time in that day to be able to give. So when we give any of our time, it is a precious, valuable gift that we're giving. Because we spend time with someone as a way to express love, then they, if that's the thing that you do, if you are always trying to show your love by being there for other people, then you're going to appreciate it when somebody takes the time to sit with you. If there's a fellowship meal, or to sit with you in the morning in between worship and find out, how is your week going? What is going on with you? Quality time is purposeful rather than accidental. We have to choose quality time. We have to make the time for it in our calendar and keep it as an appointment, just like we would a work schedule. If you have a marriage, again, and you don't have quality time in it, then you don't have very much of a marriage. You don't have something developing that relationship, because you have to make that time. If people are parents and they don't spend quality time with their children, that's how we get parents that don't know their children at all. We have parents that we can see sometimes that are so surprised when their teenagers or their college-aged kids do this thing, and they didn't even know them. It's hard to know somebody that you don't spend quality time with. That's purposeful. So when we observe people spending that quality time, what do we think of them? I mean, if you see somebody that spends quality time as a dad with his kids, is that noticeable? Especially in the world today where so many dads are not in the home, is it noticeable when there's a dad that does things with his kids? If a dad is out in the yard throwing a football or kicking a soccer ball, do people see that? We have actually had strangers stop in this parking lot and physically tell us, first of all, that they don't see kids playing outside very much anymore, so they notice that our kids are outside and that it's weird to them, but that they love it because they love to see it. And second of all, being like, there's a dad out here like throwing a ball or watching a kid on a slide, and that's amazing. People will actually stop to comment on that. And that's because it's rare in the world today. And it's not non-existent. I know a lot of good dads who spend a lot of quality time with their kids, but it's rare. And so when they do those things, it matters and people see it. If we see a husband or a wife that does that, it is noticeable. It is different. It is somebody that is doing something. If we are seeing people in the congregation, we know who is able to go and visit people here. And does it matter? Do we see those people and think, oh, they always get out when somebody has just had surgery? She is always taking food right after that person has done that. They're always on the phone talking to that person and giving them their time. We notice those things. We see them. What about the workplace? If we have bosses, has anybody ever had a boss that spent all their time in the office and wasn't on the floor at all and didn't seem to know anything about what was going on? Sorry, I have my volume on, but that's not an important call, so I will not get it right now. But if we see those people doing that, actually being employers that know what's going on with their people, that know where the talents are in their team, that can assign the right job and delegate in the right way because they actually know enough to be able to do it. Is that noticeable? Can we see? If we have doctors and nurses that spend time getting to see what the physical problems are rather than just coming in for their quick 10 minutes and not really doing anything, do we notice that? We do. And so quality time matters, and you can apply it all the way across the board in different ways, because it might be that the quality time isn't a super deep relationship. I mean, a doctor that only is seeing you a couple of times a year isn't going to have a super close, deep relationship with you, but they can still make that time feel valuable to you. Simon had a doctor's appointment yesterday with a pediatric GI doctor, and that doctor listened to every single thing going on, and he heard, and he wants to help. And that means everything compared to just kind of hearing, well, you know, something. And so it matters to us when people do the quality time. So the verse here is, and let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. Hebrews 10:24 and 25. When we do these things, we are stirring one another up to encourage that person to love more too. My love and kindness can literally make someone else love more and have more kindness themselves. A teacher in a classroom who is kind with her students is going to have a kinder classroom than a teacher who comes in and isn't. That's just it. She can't control every student in her class. She may still have a student that isn't kind in there, but I guarantee that more of them will be kind to each other by seeing that teacher's example and by doing the things that are pleasing to that teacher. Because, children want to please the people that are in authority over them. If you have a teacher, most children want to make the teacher happy. They want to come in and do a good job and learn the things. And if that teacher is using her authority or his authority in the classroom well, then that classroom's going to be smoother and more well running. And again, it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be some problems. There's always going to be a person that's not as impacted by these choices. Not every single person in the world is going to be more kind because kindness was shown to them, but the vast majority are. The vast majority of people are going to do that. So there is on page 111 a word that's called synergy. It was a word in the 1970s, and what it means is when two people work on one project, they can actually complete it in 1/3 of the time that it takes one person to do it. One person has energy, two people have synergy. And when I think about synergy, I know I use the example a lot, and not everybody listening is married, but marriage should be a relationship full of synergy, because it should be two people together doing this thing in life. We divide one another's sorrows and we multiply one another's joys, and we have the ability to do things together. And so that is a thing that happens. I mean, if you think about that, we always say many hands are light work. If one person is washing all the dishes after a fellowship meal, right, then it takes a very long while to get all of that done. But if many people are going around and they're doing dishes and they're wiping tables and they're sweeping floors, then what happens? The work gets done in just a fraction of the time as when just one person is trying to do it all. So that quality time can even be expressed in things like that. It takes a few more minutes to stay after the meal and help out a little bit, But that's showing quality time to somebody else. That is alleviating the burden that would then fall on another person if everybody else leaves. So we can think about quality time all over the place, in even the smallest of things. The next thing that was a language of love was giving and receiving gifts. People who express love through kind deeds like giving gifts are the ones that you see giving homemade bread, bringing a small item that they saw when they were traveling that reminded them of you, bringing a flower from their garden. For these people, even some tiny little trinket, like from a bubblegum machine, is going to be special to them because they're going to know that you thought of them in a time when you weren't together. Does it make us feel good if somebody brings us a small thing? It probably makes everybody feel good if somebody brings a small thing where they thought of them. Even if that's not your love language, you're gonna be hard pressed not to feel like you're valuable when someone brings something because they thought of you. There was a lady at West Side, and she has died now, so she isn't there anymore, but she was very fond of yard sales. And she really loved to go every Friday and Saturday morning because they were retired, and they went all over, her and her husband, to yard sales. That woman was phenomenal at knowing people. And what she would do at these yard sales is she would pick up things. I don't know how she did it because she didn't show favoritism. I mean, she would get things for everybody in the congregation, and it would be something that cost $0.25. But she would be like, I know you love butterflies. I saw this and thought of you, and I picked it up. I mean, she just had a little something just all the time. Practically every Sunday, she had at least a little something, and she especially delighted in doing it for the children and the teenagers. So if she knew a little boy liked to play cars, she would come in with a little sandwich bag full of Hot Wheels that she had paid 50 cents for, and she would give them to that child. But she did it for adults too. If she knew somebody liked a certain sports team and she saw a cup that had a sports team on it, she'd say, I saw this and I know you love the Hokies, so I picked it up. And she just did that. And people, oh my goodness, their smiles would just split their faces because they would just be grinning from ear to ear when it was their turn to get the little thing that she had seen and thought of. And I mean, I don't know that I could name another person that gave gifts quite in the way that she did, because it was never special. I mean, she never put it like in a bag with tissue paper. She would just hand it to you, either just the item itself in nothing, or in a sandwich bag or a freezer bag. But it was so special just to know that she had thought of the person. And she would do the same thing if she knew, that lady made a really good cake. And if she knew somebody liked it, after the fellowship meal was over, she would split out into squares all the pieces that were left, and especially to widowers and the widowed, she would put those pieces of cake on little dessert plates and wrap it in the plastic wrap and send them home with that piece of cake. And it didn't take her any time to do it. I mean, she would have 12 pieces of cake that were left, because if she made like a 9 by 13 and half of it got eaten, and it might only be like 2 bites of cake. But again, I would watch people walk out that door holding their cake like it was a precious, precious gift. And it was, because she was a generous and kind person that did that. And she was just amazing at being a mom and a grandmother. I loved to watch her with her own family in the congregation. But she is the person that came to mind when I thought of this giving and receiving gifts. So Luke 6:38 says, "Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For with measure you use, it will be measured back to you." So we have to be giving people. We might not all be like that lady was. That might not be the way that we express our love. And it's okay to not have a gift for people every single week the way she did. But we have to give something. We have to be giving people, giving with our time and our words, like we've already talked about, but sometimes giving with little things that make us think of other people. So here on page 112, it says, "In all the things I have shown you, that by working hard in this way, we must help the weak. And remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he himself said, 'It is more blessed to give than to receive.'" Acts 20:35. And her next question there is, how will you encourage the weak this week? How do I even go about identifying the weak? And what ways can people be weak? Sometimes people are weak physically, right? Sometimes people have gotten more frail. If somebody needs a walker to walk or has developed a need to use a cane to walk, then it might be because they have a weakness in a knee or in their hip or in their ankles and their feet. There are all kinds of reasons that somebody might need to use one of those adaptive things. But we would never tell them, "You don't need that. Just put that old walker off to the side." We would never do that because they do need that. And that helps them to be strong and to maintain their mobility. If somebody can walk with a walker, it keeps them from having to be wheelchair bound instead, because they can safely still move around. But what about people that we know that might be weak emotionally, or might be weak mentally even sometimes? Do we need to help those people too? The Celebrate Recovery that's happening on Wednesday nights, some of those things are weaknesses, right? Some of those things are a struggle. I mean, if you're struggling, one of the things on that list is gambling. If somebody has a struggle with gambling, then I think it's probably unarguable. You're not going to be able to call that a strength. And so if that's something they're working through, is that a very real addiction that they're going to have to put things in place to be able to overcome? It's not just going to be a matter of saying, "Well, I'm not going to do that anymore." They're going to have to put support in place to be able to stop doing that thing that they're doing. And so we need to think about that. We don't think about the weaknesses of others, I think, nearly as much as we should. We think about our own weaknesses a lot of times a lot. Sometimes not, though, right? Do we know people that sometimes think only that of their strengths? There are people that are very arrogant, people that believe that everything they do is good and well and that they have no struggles. But most people do recognize their weaknesses. But we need to recognize weaknesses in others, and not in a judgmental way, in a helping, compassionate way. If I know that there's a struggle with something, then I need to try to meet that need if I can. And you can't always. It's not your responsibility to be able, if somebody, for instance, is struggling with gambling, there's not anything that you are ever going to be able to do to make that behavior stop. That's going to have to be something that they work through. But if you had somebody that was struggling with that in your life, can you encourage them? Especially if you see them making a choice that's doing something different than that thing, then we can. But we have to recognize these weaknesses, and we have to help other people. We have to give of ourselves and help people to do those things. So we need to be looking and see, where is somebody weak after the death of a spouse? I mean, does there come all of the things like the grief and the pain? There does. And so those people need help through that. If somebody is going through a divorce, does there come a lot of feeling and emotion with that needs to be worked through? And can we help that person just by kind words alone, just by that pat on the back? We can. And so we have to think about those things. And if we don't know one another, that's what this whole book has been about, then how do we know how we can help? We have to be able to try to make those connections with people, to try to know the way that we can encourage them. So the next gift, or the next language of love, is acts of service. Those who give and receive love through kind deeds of acts of service are preparing meals for the sick and the bereaved. They're babysitting. They might be driving someone to and from church services, driving someone to the doctor's office. Perhaps they're teaching Bible classes. And you know what happens when you have somebody whose act of love is these acts of service? They get frustrated when people offer to help them with something and then they don't come. They feel burdened when it seems that they are the only person working. Now, I would caution that they need to be careful themselves and make certain that they are noticing other people around them who may also be working, because it is easy sometimes to feel burdened, like you're the one doing all the work, but really when you step back and look, there are other people working as well. Maybe not doing the exact same thing you're doing, but doing something. But that said, a lot of times is the burden falling on one person or one few people, instead of being spread out like maybe it should be. So there are 2 verses here she wants us to consider. For you were called to freedom, brothers. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. Galatians 5:13. So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are of the household of faith. Galatians 6:10. So we are supposed to do good. We can't do something if we don't have an act there. It's not enough to say, I love my church family, right? Because remember, love isn't what we say, love is what we do. So we have to actually have an action behind what we're doing. Otherwise, we are not doing anything, because do is a verb. And so we have to actually be physically having a thing that's being done in order to say that we've done something. So she says here, why is it difficult to serve in a volunteer army? What happens if we have an army just of volunteers? Everybody is there because they've chosen to be there, right? So we are soldiers for Christ. Everybody is there because they have been obedient to the gospel. So they have chosen to respond to that. When they obeyed the gospel, they had to hear and they had to believe and they had to confess and they had to repent and they had to be baptized. But then they have to live faithfully. And a lot of times, a lot of people like to kind of stop that at baptism. But if we don't push forward and live faithfully, then we aren't doing what all these commands in Scripture say to do. And so what we have sometimes is we have an army and half of our workers aren't working. Half of them aren't doing good to those, especially in the household of faith. Half of them aren't teaching others and trying to let them hear this good news. Half of them aren't doing the things to show that they're part of a family. And so we have to be careful that we're not one of those people, because there are definitely people who say, well, I've been baptized, I'm good, and they don't do the things that need to be done. We have to be people that are doing them. She says, what happens in a secular job if people just fail to show up?
You
get fired. You don't keep your job. Especially, most workplaces are very firm about it because they have some kind of system, and it's like, you can be late this many times and then after that you're done, and you've signed a contract saying that. Well, there isn't any being fired, right? When we are talking about relationships, you can't very well go around and fire people, but what you do is you disappoint them and you let them down. You hurt that relationship. You put a wedge there. You have something between you instead of having that openness that's supposed to be there. You have people put up walls. You have people choose to say that person is not trustworthy. And what you ultimately can get is no relationship, right? Because if you've over and over and over done that, then they will fire you. That's that's what happens when people are divorced, right? Those spouses become nothing to each other once that divorce is in place. Sometimes, even if they have children, they're not able to communicate, even for the benefit and the good of their children, because that relationship was so harmed and so hindered that they cannot even put those feelings aside in order to do the things that are good when there isn't that same marital relationship there. And so even though we say, technically you don't fire anybody, technically you can. Are there parents who do not have any contact with grown children because those children don't have anything to do with them anymore? Or there are parents who have abandoned their children and those children can't have any contact? There are. And so we have to think about that when we're thinking about these acts of love. When we're thinking about these relationship things, it's very possible to have a broken relationship, to have a severed relationship. And we have to be so careful that does not happen because of us. We can't help where there comes a break in the relationship that someone else has insisted upon. That happens, right? But it should not be our doing that we have made that break because of our actions. We have to be careful of that. So how is failure to keep your word a form of lying? Am I lying if I tell somebody that I'm going to do something and I don't? Yeah. I don't have to physically tell them a falsehood. I already did it when I said I'd be there and then I didn't show up. And again, this isn't talking about things that are not preventable, right? If a dad is a doctor and he gets a patient that comes in and needs surgery and then he can't make it to that soccer game like he said that he would, that's certainly not dad not keeping his word, right? That's just part of the job. And that child is going to have to find understanding for the fact that that happened, especially if dad keeps his word everywhere else all the times that he's able. So this isn't talking about non-preventable things. If a dad is a soldier or a mom is a soldier and they have to be deployed, well, they can't very well be there and be deployed at the same time. And so it's not talking about things like that, but it's talking about willingly, actively choosing to say, I will do this thing for you, and then saying instead, I'm going to do this over here instead. That's what it's talking about, like the willful, active choice not to do the things that you said. So that is my alarm going off. I am going to at least finish the next paragraph once I turn the alarm off. That class went a lot faster than I thought it was going to go. But she says here, be a light. It is important to let your light shine. Let it be known that you are working in your part of the vineyard. It's not tooting your own horn. There's a difference between letting your light shine and shining your light. If your light is on, people will see it, and that is a good thing. So we have to be sure that we are letting our light shine as Christians, and not just in the church, but in our communities as well. We have to be those people that are doing that. So thank you, ladies, so much for joining us. We will get together next week again, and we will definitely be able to finish chapter 8 and probably start into chapter 9 next week. I hope that you ladies all have a very good week, and if we get snow this weekend like it's calling for, I hope everyone stays safe. Goodbye.
Over all the earth you reign on high, every mountain stream, every sunset sky. But my one request, Lord, my only aim, is that you'd reign in me again. Lord, reign in me, reign in your power over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? Over every thought, over every word, may my life reflect the beauty of my Lord. 'Cause you mean more to me than any earthly thing. So won't you reign in me again? Lord, reign in me, reign in your power over all my dreams. In In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? Lord, reign in me. Reign in your power over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are